Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Watercolor. Today we are working on the first page of the Plants and Flowers book. It's a book that was highly requested, so let's get started. So this is the first page, and basically they're all plants and flowers. There's some tulips, daffodils, cacti, crotons, orchids, but this is the very first page, and I'm using my newest recipe of the watercolor paints that I make. I'll add a link to that. I'll add a link to everything in the description if you're interested. If you're not, that's fine too. You can always just draw the image and paint along with us. And I always try to have a plate. This is just a soap dish that I use to mix my colors onto. And on the side here, I have, off camera, I have 2 jars of water. I always recommend to have 2 jars of water because one of them is to initially clean the brush and the second one is to get all the fine particulates out. If you like watercolor painting, this is a great technique or strategy to use while painting. It helps a lot. And if you're using my paint, I recommend spraying them a little bit. Either that, or you could just use your brush and then just kind of like grab water and then just put it right on top. The reason being is I use a ton of pigment, which basically helps make the colors a lot more vibrant. So my goal is, I'm always trying to perfect my recipe to make really vibrant watercolor paints. As a lot of you probably know, watercolors can be a little dull, and so I'm just trying to remedy that. So I got a little bit of orange here and there in that, so I'm going to take that off. All right, so the very first thing we will do is, if you have brown, if you're using my palette, just use the brown that you have here. And then if you're using a different palette, just get some brown. And if you're using a different palette, obviously it will come out looking a little different, but that's okay. Initially, we're going to just put down a flat wash for the container, for the little pot that's holding the flowers, or the cacti I should say, and just go ahead, lay it all in. Don't even worry about texture or shadows or anything else like that. Just put in the color. If it looks a little textured, that's fine. It doesn't have to be necessarily a flat wash. We are going to add more shading in a little bit. So we do all of that, just lay it in. Okay, that looks good. Quick initial layer. And then in here, there's basically pebbles or stones. And so in order to mix that, I'm going to grab a little bit of my light blue and then also just a little bit of my black. It gives you a really nice kind of like cool gray. And I'm going to add a bunch of water because I want to dilute it. I don't want it to be too strong. I always suggest having a scrap piece of paper that you can just kind of test some of the colors on top of if you're not certain of how they'll appear. It's always a good thing to have. Although the more you use the same palette, the more used to how it looks you'll become. So, but this black is just really strong. I might actually try to dull it down a little bit. I'm always trying to find that balance in the colors. But basically, okay, that's a good light, cool gray. And I'm just going to grab that and then just pull it all the way through the base of where the stones are. And then I'm just going to go all the way through. Okay. Now the light source for this image, you can honestly, you can make the light source come from whatever angle you want. I'm going to put it in the upper left hand corner coming down like this. So here is where most of the shadows will be. Same with here and here. And you'll see how we'll slowly build that out as we're painting this. And next, we're going to do the flat wash to fill in the body of the cacti. The stems that lead to the flowers, they're slightly off-colored. We will add that differentiation after we build up the flat wash first. So we're gonna grab a bunch of the pigment. We want a bunch of pigment, and don't be shy about getting the pigment out. If you're using my palette, the green, I'm still trying to kind of get a good balance, but feel free to just pick up as much as you want. Obviously, the more pigment that you pick up, the stronger the color will come off. And the initial layer, we should make it lighter, so I'm just going to add more water so that even though it'll still be a nice even visible color, we will build up on it, so it doesn't need to be as strong as the final layer. So this is just the initial wash so that we can kind of see where everything's going to go. So we can go ahead and just start laying down that color, avoiding the little petals from the blossoms and from the stems that lead to the blossoms. We're just adding it in nice and evenly. It's a nice strong green color. And then avoiding the stem as well as we're blocking it in. Okay. Get in here in the details. And feel free to slow down. You don't have to go as fast as I am. I tend to work a little quicker, especially since I have the muscle memory built up over painting for so long. But don't feel rushed by any means. Take your time. This is a bit of a relaxing, leisurely activity. And especially when I'm doing a new painting, I've already painted these before just to kind of get the feel of how I want the color layout to be. And also, if you are painting my watercoloring books, you'll notice, especially if you do them more than once, you'll notice that the more you paint or draw the same image, the quicker and more confident you become with it. I guess that's the case with anything in life. But like if you paint a flower or a house or a cat or whatever it is, the more times that you do it, you notice that each time you just get that much better at it. And that's another thing that I like about these books. If I just want to practice a technique, I can just grab a book and the image is already on there, so I could just start experimenting and getting more comfortable with the technique. I don't have to worry about drawing it all out. Okay, so we're just gonna let that part dry, and while it's drying, we can go ahead and come back into the pot section of it. So now we're going to add a little more of the brown, and before we start mixing up other colors into it, we're just going to add some texture, give it a little more character. So you can see that this is a very strong brown, and since the light is coming like this, we're just going to add all of this here, the shadow underneath the brim. I got a little bit out there, but that's fine. And I'm going to rinse my brush, and then I'm going to dry it off a little bit because I want to get some texture in here. So I'm just going to go like that. And you see, like, making these marks with the drier brush helps get some texture in there. And don't worry about going outside the lines. A lot of people worry about that, but honestly, you can add so much more character and make the image so much more interesting when you have some of that disorder or that chaos that water is so good at portraying while you're painting with it. I say lean into it. Don't shy away from it. Obviously, too much can kind of ruin the painting. There is a balance that's necessary, but you can learn to have fun with it and kind of make things look more interesting. Okay, so now we're just going to let that dry. We have the texture in there. We have a little bit of the suggestion of the shadow. We will build up on that, but we don't have to continuously do that, because if we do, then it'll start getting a little runny, and we can't really separate where it goes as easily when it's wet. Unless you're going for that, in which case feel free to pursue that. And now we're just gonna grab more of the green, and we're gonna grab a lot more of it, because we have a good solid green as the base. We're gonna want to pick up a good amount and then add also a little bit of brown in there. See, a little bit goes a long way. You see how we're getting this really nice dark green here, and it's a green that leans more towards yellow green. So I really like this one, especially when painting flowers, different flowers and plants. This is a really nice shade of green especially for shadows. And we're just going to add a little more pigment. Okay, so this is looking good. We can go ahead and start blocking in some of the shadows. Now remember, the cacti, they're like round. They kind of go like this, like they have a little bit of roundness to them as they go up into the point. So you'll see what I mean. So like we'll go ahead and we'll add the shadow here, kind of like that. But because there's a roundness to them, we can't just do it completely flat throughout the whole thing. So we want to show that the shadow itself adds a curve that shows the form of the plant. So basically, we're adding the shadow to the darker part of that curve. And granted, some parts of it will have more shadow because it's a cylinder with cylinders on top of it, basically. So just kind of keep that in mind. Even if you don't do it perfectly, as long as you have some variability in how you distribute the darker color, it will look good. It'll look good. So like I'll go back in here a little bit more because it's further away from the light, so strengthening that shadow looks better. And then in here, and a little bit like there. This one I'm just gonna cover it actually completely. It'll help create that contrast. And a little bit over here, like that. Maybe a little bit here because of the stem that's going up. Like that. Right here behind. The spikes that are coming out of the cacti, we can just cover them completely because we will, towards the end, outline them with black, and it'll look really nice. It'll really make everything kind of pop. You'll see. Okay, and then I'm just going to add a little bit here because of the petals, that are coming from the flower. There's a little bit of shadow there. And again, it does not have to look perfect. You just kind of have to convey which way the shadow is coming from and kind of work with it that way. There we go. All right, step back for a moment, take a look, see how you're liking it. Pretty good. I should add some shadow over here as well. Kind of like that. There we go. And then maybe just for the crease for the side of the cacti. There we go. Okay, so that's looking good so far. I'm gonna rinse off my brush. And then we're gonna mix a little bit of the yellow, depending on where you're, I don't know if you're using a dish or like a soap dish like I am. You may run out of space at some point, but just keep finding new spots in the meantime. You can always just pause and clean off the plate that you're mixing on if you need to. But basically, what we're going to do is we're just going to grab a good amount of concentration of yellow, maybe dilute it with a little bit of water, make it more flowy. And we're just going to dab it right in the middle, like that. And we're not going to be too perfect about it. And then after that, we're just gonna pick up some of this red, and then we're just gonna go right on the outside, and then just kind of blend it in with that middle yellow. And they'll kind of run into each other a little bit. That's fine. We're just gonna grab a little more and just kind of get it in there like that. And if they run into each other, just let them blend. We're not going for any specific ratio. We're not trying to make it perfect. Okay, so see, that looks pretty nice, the green contrasting with the red. We will add in more red in a little bit, kind of layer it in. And while we are letting that dry, then we can refocus back on the pot. So we're just gonna grab some more of the brown, and then go in and add. See, now we're going really dark. But remember, watercolors always dry lighter. So even though we're adding this high contrasting value, it will come off a little lighter as it dries. But this gives us an opportunity. I'm just gonna rinse my brush, dry it off a bit. This gives us an opportunity to create more texture, more interesting shading, kind of like brush edge marks. They really make things look more interesting. They're just more appealing to look at. That maybe a little bit back here, just to show the curve of the pot. And so, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. We're just gonna leave that like that. And while that is drying, now we can refocus over here where the pebbles are. Now remember, we said that the light is coming from the upper left hand corner going downwards diagonally like this. So we can go ahead and grab a little bit more blue, just a little bit more blue, and then just a slight amount of black. We do not need a lot of black, just a little bit, ever so little. Okay, so that's pretty good. We're just gonna mix it nice and evenly in here. Let's see. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start laying that down. So if the light is coming this way, the shadow is gonna kind of come out this way. So we'll go ahead and we'll just first we'll layer it in one block before we start doing the individual pebbles. Just kind of like that. Just maybe give it a little bit of an edge, show the form, and we can even go over the pot a little bit just to show that the shadow is coming over, and use that same mixture. It doesn't have to be the same shadow color that we used for the pot, because the different shading or the different value of the color itself is enough to distinguish the shadow. And then now we're just going to come in and then just kind of do some dots and outlines for where the pebbles are, to show that there is texture in there because of the little stones that are in the pot. And just kind of maybe dab a little bit, maybe a little bit like this, a little bit of kind of like U, almost like a U, just to show the form of the shadow. A little bit over here because of the brim that's above it. And then, yeah, I think, step back for a moment. Looks good enough. And now we can work on mixing the green, which is a slightly different color, the green for the stems right underneath the petals. And I'm going to kind of switch out my dish because I just don't have enough space. But I will keep these colors to the side here because I will be going back to them. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the darker blue, and a bunch of the green. What we're going for is kind of like a blue-green. something like that. That's pretty good. I'm just going to add more water so we can dilute it a little more so it's easier to see. Okay, that's good. Actually, you know, I want to make it lighter, because otherwise it'll start blending in a little bit with the darker green, like where we used for the shadows. Let's see, that's good. That's good. We'll just use that. We can go ahead and start laying those colors in, and then try to make sure that the brush itself isn't too wet because it'll make it harder to control. And like this color does blend in a little bit, but you can still differentiate it from the green color of the cacti. And we will also add another layer to establish the shadow of this color. Kind of like that. Okay. And just go slowly. Just adding in all of the color. Very slowly. And again, if you go outside the lines, no big deal. Okay. I'm gonna rinse off my brush. So we've done a lot actually for 20 minutes. We're 20 minutes in so far with painting this one, and it's looking pretty good. I am going to go ahead and grab some more of this, the darker blue, maybe get a little more black, just a little bit, and then add a little more of the light blue. See, I added too much. That is way too much. So I'm gonna grab a little more of the black. Oh man, making a mess over here. I'm gonna clean off my brush a bit. Add more water. Okay, let's see how this looks. We can add a little bit of harder shadow tones with this one, with this mixture of the gray. So we can just go ahead and put in a couple here and there. Maybe a little bit outlining the brim, kind of like that. And because I added more water though, it will dry up in a lighter tone. Just keep that in mind. Okay. A little bit over here on the edge. Okay, rinse off my brush again. And now we can just grab more red. I'm just gonna grab a bunch. I'm just really gonna dig in there. We're trying to pick up a bunch of the pigment. And let's see. Okay, perfect. So what we're doing here is we're just kind of like pulling some of it out from the center outwards. So we're not coloring the whole thing. We definitely want to keep some of that lighter tone underneath on the flower, but we're just kind of almost like from the inside out. We're just kind of like pulling it out to show that towards the center the red is more concentrated on the petals of the flower, and it gives a really nice contrast. It makes it look very appealing. And then we're gonna add a little bit more like here, like that. Grab a little more pigment, maybe increase, make it more vibrant. Okay, rinse off my brush. Let's see. And then next we're gonna grab a little bit of orange. Actually, we're just gonna kind of like mix it in here. Let's see. That's looking good. And just a little bit, we're just gonna dab a couple of dots here in the center. We still want the yellow to be visible, but we want to add a little bit of orange. It adds a lot to the variability of the warmer colors against the cooler colors in the plant. And we will also be adding, right now, we'll add a little bit of a blue background. We'll go ahead and we'll just mix up some of the lighter blue here, or the turquoise if you want to get specific. And that looks good. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to make it a little more textured, and I'm not going to color the entire background. The reason being is it'll keep the focus onto the plant, and it'll look a little more artistic. So what we'll do is we're just going to add this, add it in, and as we get further away from the object itself, we're just going to kind of press the brush against the paper, and it'll give us these nice strokes here, and also add some water to just kind of dilute it. And you can see how it gives almost like a vignette feeling. I'm gonna add some more water here towards the edge, because it's all mostly concentrated towards the actual object. And I'm going to add a little more blue. I'm going to do this here in between, and in here, and then in here. So just more pigment, more blue towards the object, and as you get further away, just kind of like fade it out using pressure on the brush, as well as additional water, because it'll help pull it out, spread it around, and almost like it's focusing in towards the object and fading out the further away you get from the object. I hope that makes sense. If anything that I'm explaining or doing does not make sense, please feel free to leave me a comment. I always try to respond right away. That way people can get a better feel. And also, if you don't understand something, or if you know, I'm just going too fast or just not making sense, I may even make a whole separate video for it, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. There we go. Just kind of clean up my brush, kind of blend those in. There we go. See, that makes the whole thing just look so much more interesting. Maybe a little bit down here. Clean off my brush, and then just kind of pick it up, spread it out. There we go. Okay, all that is looking good. Now we just want to mix up some more green. Mix up some more green and dark blue. Just a little bit of green and dark blue. That's too much blue. Too much blue. Get more green. Okay, so that is a good color here. And we're just gonna use that to give some outline to the stems, the parts of the stem that lead up to the flower. Just a little bit, kind of like show off where it is, show that there's some depth and form to it. This part over here, I'm just gonna color it in completely, like a little bit like that, like that. And you don't need a lot. I mean, you can see how just a little bit adds a lot of form. And do that. And that. And add here. And that. And that. Okay. There we go. Okay, so that's looking good. Rinse that off. And let me just step back for a moment, take a look at how everything's looking. Okay, we are right at the 30-minute mark. And to be honest, you could probably stop here and it looks fine by itself. But I do want to add those detailed marks for where we're just going to put kind of like outlines for different parts, especially for the little needles on the cacti. And what I'm doing here is I'm just using black, and feel free to use as much pigment as you want, but I'm mixing it kind of like into a thick paste, because what that helps with is getting the bristles to stick together to a nice point where you can just get like a really nice little point, which is what we want for, especially for the little spikes on the cacti. So here we go. We're just gonna add them like this, a little bit at a time. Kind of like here, and then also just feel free to do like outlines. You know, if you want to emphasize certain parts of the image. And feel free to move your brush like straight up and down, because it'll help actually with the control of the thickness of the lines. I just kind of have to keep it at an angle just so that the camera isn't obstructed, but I think you get the idea. Kind of like that. Maybe a little bit of outline here for the petals to make them pop a little more. I often, when I'm doing commissions or painting for myself, or just for a fun project, I often use black ink for outlines, or just here and there just to add some, I don't know, I guess contrast would be the best word to use, some contrast to the image, because, and again, depending on what you're going for, I wouldn't, if I'm trying to do like a photorealistic image, I would be much more sparing. I would not use a lot of black. Depending on what I'm painting, I may not use any black. It's just, I really love using it because it's almost like I can grab my ink if I wanted to and just add it, and it'll look better, because ink, especially the ink that I use, is very opaque, and it's like a really good black ink. But this black that I've added here for my palette is also more than sufficient. It gives a good contrast, it gives a good outline, and you can see, like, just looking at it for a moment, you can see this part of it it's not outlined with black, and this part that it is, you can see how much character that adds to it. Like, it just makes everything pop so much better. And it may also be because I'm slightly colorblind. It may be that doing this in itself just helps me define things better and register them better with my vision. So that may be part of the reason why I enjoy doing it so much. But I have had a lot of positive feedback on how it looks from people. So I think others can appreciate it too. The only downside is that it does make things look a little more cartoony, but again, you don't have to add it. The painting looked pretty complete on its own without adding these black strokes in here. But yeah, so anyway, that's my little tangent about that. With the little spikes that we're making here, if you go just like very like in one direction when you add them, you can make, it'll give you some variability, and you can also experiment with how much pressure you're applying, because that way you can make it look more organic, so all the brush strokes are not exactly the same. And remember, if you keep the brush straight up and down like this, like, it might be blocking some of the camera, but it makes it a lot easier to make a very straight line, a very straight and thin line, kind of like that. But yeah, I'm just gonna finish up adding these little needles here. And also take the time to experiment with sculpting the brush head so that you can get better thin lines. You will see a difference. Like, one thing you can do is, while you're grabbing your color, if you just kind of roll the brush as you're picking up the color, just roll it from side to side, kind of like this. Like, just go like that. Just go like this while you're picking up the color, and it'll help bring the actual brush head to that nice point. Okay, let's grab all of this. Over here a little bit. And in some places I may add more black just to help emphasize the objects that are in the foreground. And then add a little bit here. And definitely make the lines thicker in some parts and thinner in others. The reason for that is twofold. One is, obviously you don't want to emphasize everything with the same strength. And then the other is, it actually makes it look more organic. If you just had like a micron pen, for example, it would make everything look very synthetic. Sorry about that. I don't know if you heard that. My phone just went off a second ago. Let me make sure I turn it off. But basically, yeah, if you use like a micron pen, which has a very set diameter, unlike a brush where you can, it's kind of like, it alternates depending on how much pressure you use. Let's see. But yeah, that's also why I usually prefer a brush when I'm inking. Even if I'm just doing like a straight ink drawing, a brush is so much better just because you get such a great variety in the lines that you can make with it. It just makes everything look so organic. Unless you're drawing like robots or machine parts or something like that, in which case, you know, they have their purpose with the micron pens. Okay, and then we're just adding some more here. And you can do like little short burst strokes to help make it look more edgy, and also as you pull the brush away, it helps go from the line or the stroke mark itself, it goes from looking thick to thin, which is, you know, exactly how a spike on a cacti would look like. And then here, a little bit like that, a little bit on the petals, maybe some dots in the middle of the petals. That'll help give that texture. And outlining some of the petals like that, and then down here on the stem, and going back to the little needles poking out of the cacti. And you know, you don't have to outline everything exactly as I do. You can leave some things out if you don't like them, or just, you don't even actually I just thought about this, you don't even have to actually outline it with black. So some artists like to use outlines of a really dark value of, you know, whatever the color of the object is. Like, for example, we could have used a really dark green, and it would give, you would get a similar feel, but not exactly the same. like if you go and look at maybe, for example, some of the older Disney movies, I know everything's CGI now, but like the older ones that used to be hand-drawn, the way that they would do the outline is actually they would never use black. They would use an outline that's just darker based on the color that they were of the object they were outlining, and it makes it look nice. It still gives you that distinction, but it does look also more organic. It feels more natural. But I think using black, especially in this case, because flowers in and of themselves, the subject matter is it's very organic in nature and very chaotic. Adding a distinct black line like this really does help give that form much. Oh man, I don't even know what happened there. Oh, I think I got some of my palm. Some of my palm picked up the brown. That's what happened there. So yeah, hopefully you didn't get that. But it still doesn't look too bad. It's not like front and center. But anyway, yeah. So using the black outline while painting these, it just helps bring a lot more organization to the kind of like organic chaos that a lot of flowers have. And I think that's part of the thing that makes flowers such an interesting subject matter, is because there's some kind of like an organic, chaotic order to them, because there's so much going on, but then when you stop to pay attention, you do see that there's some kind of a organization happening there. Okay, so I'm just gonna step back. Let's see. Clean off my brush. I'm gonna try to pick up some of this color here because it's kind of bothering me. The way you can do that, if you did a mistake like this, just basically wet your brush, and then as much as you can, rinse it off completely, and then just use the water to pick up whatever color you don't want, and then you can always grab your rag and then just pull some of it off, and that's good enough. Okay, so we are done with this one. I'm very happy with it, and yeah. Okay, so that was it for that painting. That's the first page of the Plants and Flowers book. Please feel free to tag me if, like on social media, Facebook, Instagram. The name is just Wandering Watercolor. And let's see, 42 minutes, not that bad. If you have any questions, just throw them in the comments. And thank you. I will see you next time.